good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time of the day you happen to be watching this. Some of you here probably thought you had seen the last of God Eater Resurrection after my playthrough of it ended abruptly. Well, I'm here to tell you that I was indeed playing it. As a matter of fact, I just finished the game a while ago and I'm ready to give my thoughts and opinions on it. I'll start with an overview of the game, then I'll talk about a few things I liked, a few things I disliked, parts of the story that stuck out to me. You know, nothing complicated. But this will be a bit lengthy because, well, the game is pretty long. If you're curious, it did take me around 70 hours to finish it. Now, if you're interested in playing this and you're wondering where the game falls in the series timeline, chronologically, it's the first game. It's based off of the original God Eater, which came out in 2010 for Japan. Then God Eater Burst came out several months later for both Japan and the West, with its biggest change being the expanded story, and then God Eater Resurrection came out in 2015 for Japan and 2016 for the West. Now bear in mind, if you're looking for the PC version of this game, it's bundled with God Eater 2 Rage Burst. The additional blades and guns that were added in God Eater 2 were also brought over, and it expands the story even more by adding 4 more difficulties to God Eater Burst 10, giving you a total of 14. Resurrection also has a unique combat mechanic called the Predator style, but I'll get more into that later. Now, while I did learn a lot playing this isn't really intended to be a guide. If you learn something, that's great, but there's still a lot about this game I still don't understand. Like that bullet editor, I can't figure that thing out to save my life. But, like I said, just my thoughts, opinions, and experiences rolled up into one video. The game has a post-apocalyptic setting, taking place several decades into the future. The quote-unquote gods in this game are actually referred to as origami. I mean, they mean the same thing basically, but just keep in mind that every character in this game properly refers to the monsters as such. The origami are composed of oracle cells which can devour and take on the attributes of just about anything, and you'll notice that a lot of the origami, they resemble animals or machines or a little bit of both, and possessing such qualities have allowed the origami to develop at this alarming rate, to the point where by the time the game starts and your narrative begins, Earth has been drained of most of its resources and humanity has been driven to near extinction. And this is where Fenrir comes in. It's a global organization that's dedicated to oracle research and protecting humankind. Because the origami are immune to conventional weaponry, and that's probably the main reason they've been so successful in the first place. So Fenrir has developed special weapons called God Arcs to combat the origami, and the people who use these weapons are called, take a wild guess, it's in the title, God Eaters. So God Arcs can harm the origami because they're also composed of oracle cells, and you can get your God Arc in 2 flavors, guns and blades. So blades are for melee combat and they come with deployable shields. They also possess extendable mouths that allow them to eat the origami and collect their oracle cells. However, guns are the weapons that are capable of shooting these oracle cells back at the origami in the form of bullets. And I think you can kind of see the problem here. The guns can shoot but not collect, and the blades can collect but not shoot. So you create your own silent protagonist and the game opens with him, or her, joining Fenrir's Far East branch. Now you know how it goes, you can't be the main protagonist without having some kind of special power, so your character is actually a new type, which basically means that you get the best of both worlds. Your God Arc has both a blade and a gun form, and you can switch freely between the two. Most of the other players, they can only use either one or the other, and for a long time it's really only you and one other person that ends up possessing this new type ability. You're quickly introduced to the other residents of the den. You spend the first 2 difficulties getting to know everyone, learning the basics of battle, and that sort of thing. So, good things. What did I like about the game? Well, I loved the weapon variety. Like I said, as a new type, your God Arc is a blade, a shield, and a gun rolled up into one. But these weapons aren't all the same, and I'm sure you'll find a loadout that suits you. Most short swords deal slashing and piercing damage. Its claim to fame, if you will, is that you can dish out quick combos and then conveniently just dance out of harm's way when the going gets tough. Its unique ability launches you into the air with an upward slash so you can follow up with air combos. And I think the thing I liked most about it is that it's the only weapon that lets you sidestep in midair. I found this really good if I air devoured and I needed to get out of an origami's way quickly, or if its weak point was to its side and I needed to get there quickly, so if you're wondering which weapon is the roguelike one, it's this one. The damage isn't the highest at times, but it's the lightest weapon and you get the most mobility from it. Longswords are a little slower and they usually specialize in slashing damage. It's got a decent attack speed and a moderate damage output. So this is your all-rounder weapon, or in my case the I'm not sure what to take with me so I'll stick with this kind of weapon. It was either this or the short sword. Its unique ability allows you to cancel your combo at any given time, meaning you could pull off an indefinite combo if your circumstances allow. Pressing this button combination again will cause the player to shoot a quick bullet from the side of the blade. And I guess I should also mention that slashing weapons tend to work really well on tails, so keep that in mind. Now, busters are the complete opposite of short swords. They're very slow, but they deal massive amounts of damage when you land a hit. Their specialty is usually a mix between crushing and slashing, and I use them here and there during the early to mid game, but I mean, frankly, unless the enemy was really weak to crush, I usually dropped it in favor of the other two swords I just mentioned. This was especially true as the game got harder and less forgiving with mistakes, and I started to value speed and mobility over raw power. Its unique ability has the player briefly block with the shield before following up with an upward swing, and like the longsword, you can also use the stance to cancel combos. Buster blades can also be charged by holding down square. Spears only deal piercing damage. Its unique ability lets the player quickly jump backwards, which I guess is good for evading an attack or setting up for a mid-air heavy. I honestly didn't use spears that much. I guess lastly I should mention that like the Buster, the spears also have a charging attack, but you're free to move around while it's charging. Scythes only deal slashing damage, and they have the best reach in the game. Its unique ability lets the player extend the blade and deal sweeping blows to enemies around you, which is really good if you're surrounded. And lastly, for the melee weapons, hammers only deal crushing damage, and I actually use these the least, especially after the first arc. They're pretty slow. They're not as slow as the Buster, but still pretty slow. They all have a thruster at the head, and its unique ability allows the player to ignite it and swing away at their target. Alright, now let's talk about the guns. So snipers specialize in piercing damage, and as you've probably guessed by now, they're most effective from far away. The unique ability allows the player to cloak themselves, which makes it harder for Origami to detect them. This was good if I needed to remove myself from the fight or sneak up on one for a charged devour. Most assault guns deal an even amount of crushing and piercing damage. You don't experience any knockback when you fire your bullets, and you can move around freely while doing so as well. Its unique ability lets you jump backwards to evade attack. Now, while I did use snipers for most of the games, I do really like blast guns. They specialize in crushing damage, and their unique ability is definitely my favorite one. It allows the user to store and build up their Oracle points for later, which I don't think I mentioned Oracle points before. It's basically your ammunition. And this is actually pretty necessary as the blast bombs, while they're powerful, are pretty expensive as far as the Oracle point consumption is concerned. Now for the shotguns, I use those the least. I'm sure they're not bad, but they just weren't for me. You basically gotta be kissing the Origami to be in firing range, and if you still don't believe me, its unique ability actually launches you forward, bringing you closer to the target. Look, at that point I'd rather just hack away at it with the melee weapon and look cool while doing it. Now last are the shields, and I don't really have much to say about those because, well, they aren't very complicated. The bucklers are the smallest, they have the fastest deployment speed, but they absorb the least amount of damage. Oh, and by the way, yes, unless you have a tower, you can still take damage even with your shield out, so keep that in mind. The mid-tier shield has a slightly longer deployment speed than the buckler, but it absorbs more damage, and while the tower shield takes a noticeable amount of time to deploy, it absorbs all the damage from blocked attacks. And it's also worth noting that there's a skill that reduces the deployment time for your shield. These things help significantly, I'd recommend it. Now this game is mission-based. You end up taking your missions over a counter, and there are two types, story and free. If you want to just experience the story, you don't have to do the free missions. There will probably come a point where you'll want to backtrack and do some of them to farm materials for better weapons, or because you're like me and you walked into the next story mission and got your ass handed to you.
I can't leave them. Move to support. You can't take me down. No. Kill confirmed. Mommy. Come on now.
but they aren't mandatory. I made the mistake of doing each and every mission in order during my first playthrough, and it did make the game feel like that much more of a slog, because it'd be hours upon hours before something happened, and it wasn't until near the end of difficulty 3 that I realized that the story would only progress after doing the missions labeled story. I know this kind of sounds like common sense, but it was really something I overlooked at the beginning of the game. I legitimately thought that I had to do each and every mission I was given. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm grateful that a lot of this game's filler is optional. Now, the skill system was very overwhelming at first. Actually, it kinda is if I'm being honest, but I have found it to be pretty helpful. So your teammates earn AP when you take them on missions, and it can be spent on skills, so things like stat increases, sharing more HP when reviving a fallen comrade, increasing your item stock, raising your chances of getting mission rewards, and stuff like that. Now, while your character can craft upgrades to obtain these abilities too, you'll probably make the most use of skills when you start finding abandoned god arcs after missions, because while these things can't be equipped, they come with skills already installed and you can transfer them to your own equipment. So for example, if you obtain an abandoned buster blade with a certain skill, you can transfer this skill to one of your own busters, even if it's a skill unrelated to melee combat, like a greater reward rate or increased gun damage. It stays in effect as long as you have that modified buster blade equipped. So in most cases for me, it really didn't matter what skills I equipped where, as long as I had it somewhere. It is worth noting that you can merge uninstalled skills together to create new ones, so if you end up getting a skill you don't want, don't just throw it out. You might have some use for it later. I have mentioned devouring an origami, but not what it actually does for you. So when you or one of the other melee-type god eaters eats an origami, you enter burst mode, which provides increased movement speed, greater attack damage, probably a bunch of other perks that I can't think of right now. But it makes you stronger, basically. Passive skills like health and oracle regeneration that only take effect when entering burst mode are also activated, and you also gain special bullets that are closely related to the origami you just ate, because you'd be surprised how many origami in this game are actually weak to their own element. Alternatively, because you are a new type, you can eat the origami, switch to your gun, and fire your newly acquired bullet at a teammate and send them into burst mode. Devouring an origami will cause you to enter burst mode level 1, and to get to the higher levels you're going to need a new type character, also in burst mode, to fire a transfer shot to you. I found that most of the new type characters in the game do this quite often, so it wasn't that much of an issue for me. At first you only have two ways of devouring an origami, which is the quick devour and the charged one, but you do unlock more as you progress through the game. These abilities are the predator styles I mentioned earlier, and they essentially make eating more convenient. So some let you devour in midair, others propel you out of harm's way after taking a bite, some have a wider range, some give you more items, the list goes on. I had mixed feelings about the music while I was playing the game, but I really started to appreciate it after I finished the game. I'd say it's pretty solid. Some of my favorite songs are God Eater, the song that plays at the title screen named after the game itself. Both versions of Voice of the Blizzard are pretty good. All versions of the God's Table. Strategy Briefing, which plays during the mission results screen. And Deo Volenti, the first final boss theme. And yeah, you heard that right, I said first final boss theme. At first it was kind of forgettable, but as I heard the songs more often and I started associating them with certain events that happened in the game, it really started to grow on me. Without getting into spoilers, I liked the story. I guess I should mention that I'm easily impressed when it comes to storytelling. It doesn't have to be super unique or overly complex for me to enjoy it. And in this game's case, it was kind of predictable, especially the second arc, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I also liked the occasional banter between the characters every now and then, especially during the missions. It was pretty nice to hear considering the game's rather grim setting.
We are ready to proceed with the mission. Your task is to seek out and track the Nova Origami.
This is gonna be sweet! Man, just getting eyes on that thing is bound to bring in some serious cash. Come on, team, quit your ass dragging. You got cash to make. A dangerous origami to find.
Well, aren't you a little go-getter today?
Let's head out. Come on.
So once we find that big old beastie, we get to kick its ass right into the ground, am I right?
Well, not exactly. Once you've confirmed the target, we'll dispatch an execution squad. Much of the first unit has been selected.
Wait, what? That's bullcrap! Bullcrap!
Pipe down, Shun. We don't want to delve too deep into this barrel of crazy.
So, bad things. What did I dislike about the game? The camera. Even after you set it to far away, I feel like it's still way too close. And this might simply just be a result of the game being developed for handhelds for the PSP and Vita, and then ported to the PS4 and PC later. And this especially became problematic in situations where my group and I had to fight more than one origami, and it was hard to keep all of them within sight. And actually, while I'm on the topic of multiple origami, it is very hard to split these things up, because very rarely will you ever get a mission where you only need to hunt one origami. Because you're the leader, you're allowed to give orders like split up, converge, focus on a certain target, etc. to your team as a whole, but I really wish you could give this option to the individuals. It'd be nice if I could tell a specific character to break off and keep an origami distracted because I knew that they could hold their own for a while. And I cannot tell you how many times my team got surrounded by origami and I ordered everyone to split up, and then I turned around and realized that both origami were actually locked onto me, and now everyone's done dipped and left me to deal with both of them. I also loved it when my team already split up, right? Like there's 2 large origami and 4 of us. So I send 2 people to keep the first one distracted, while the rest of us go after the other one. My partner and I have almost killed ours, and then it runs away for no reason, and parks itself just close enough to get the other one's attention, and they stick like glue after that. They are madly in love. No amount of split up commands are separating those 2 anymore. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about as far as origami is concerned, at least for now, is that there are a lot of recolored origami in this game. There's around like 50-something origami species in this game, but only like 20 of them are actually original. The rest of them, they're recolors. So for example, you got the Zygote, but then it's got 3 recolors for the Blaze, Spark, and Freeze elements. There's the Chi-Yu, but then you have the Fallen Chi-Yu, who's basically the same thing, just a different color and uses lightning-based attacks. And then while the Sekhmet does go by a different name, I mean, they got the same body type, and their attack patterns are very similar. And that was just 2 examples. Almost all the origami in this game have at least 2 recolors. Another asset of the game that was heavily reused was the map selection. There's only like 6 or 7 places that you visit over and over again throughout the entire game, and it does make the game feel a little tedious sometimes. I'd also like to add that while only doing the story missions does improve the pacing of the game, it's still kinda spaced out. It'll take a few missions before something interesting happens, and for the most part the gameplay is pretty far removed from the story. I mean, with few exceptions, it usually goes like this. Something happens, you stop what you're doing to go hunt an origami, and then the thing that ended abruptly after the mission started either resumes at the end of the mission or at the beginning of the next one, as if that entire sort of middle section didn't happen. I mean, they obviously do happen and they're obviously canon to the story, but they often don't feel connected to what's going on. I feel like if you were to just take the cutscenes and arrange them into a movie with no gameplay in between, it would still make almost perfect sense. Maybe up until the ending, but besides that, almost perfect sense. Alright, let's talk about the story. Or at least talk about the story in greater detail than I've already been talking about it. So there will be spoilers coming up, so here's your warning, even though the game is like 3 years old and this video is pretty late, but regardless, feel free to skip ahead if you're interested in playing the game blind and you're trying to avoid that. You're still here? Alright, let's talk about the game's story. So as I said, I found it to be pretty predictable. A lot of the things that happened, I kinda saw it coming, except Johannes turning traitor. That was one of the things that actually surprised me. He was in charge of the Aegis project, and at first it sounded all nice and everything. The plan was basically to make a little bubble where people could finally live in peace, but if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. For some reason, the Aegis project just wasn't working out, so instead, this dude was actually planning on creating an ark to preserve humanity, but of course everyone can't fit inside of it, so he was only gonna let the Fenrir soldiers, the staff, and their immediate families onto the Ark. He was then going to destroy the world, human, origami, and all, with an origami of his own making, and then everyone would come off the Ark when the dust had settled and Earth would be inhabitable again. This was kept a secret for a while, and Johannes even planned Lindo's death by conditioning Alyssa, who wasn't very mentally sound at the time, into killing him, because Lindo was so close to finding out the truth and someone had to shut him up.
These are your enemies, the ones that hurt you, Alyssa. The origami exist only to hunt, only to kill.
Origami, only to kill.
Yes, Alyssa, only to kill. They will rip away from you, make you suffer. And this is the one you must make an end of. This is the one. The origami that killed your family. The one that devoured your mother and father.
Papa, Mama.
It's easy taking a life. Just aim your god arc and pull the trigger.
Pull the trigger.
This will keep you safe. Repeat these words as you pull that trigger, Alyssa. Jeden, dva, three.
Jeden, dva, three. Jeden, dva, three.
These are your enemies, the ones that hurt you, Alyssa. The origami exist only to hunt, only to kill.
If things get crazy or chaotic, I want you to look up in the sky.
No! Stop! Make it stop!
Alyssa! What the hell happened?
No! I didn't mean to, Mom! Papa, I don't want to! I didn't! I'm sorry!
Now, as the residents of the Den find out about the Aegis/Ark project, it was very interesting to see their reactions. For example, Brendan, one of the minor characters, felt like he should board the Ark because there currently is no other solution to completely get rid of the origami, and he feels if he refuses to board the ship, then everyone's prior sacrifices for him would have been in vain. Koda's struggle is definitely notable here as well. He's still very much in touch with his mom and his sister, and they're clearly what drives him to fight each and every day. When Sakuya and Alyssa, because they're the first people to find out about the Ark project, when they inform the others about it, Koda is one of the few main characters that actually agrees to board the vessel. His priority was protecting his mom and sister no matter the cost. But later we see him having a rather heartwarming conversation with his mom and sister, and Koda does tell him about the Ark project, the good parts at least, and then Koda's sister gets excited and asks if her friends would be coming too. Of course they wouldn't, because only Fenrir and immediate family would be allowed to board, but he had to flat out lie to her just so he wouldn't get her all worried and stuff. And that's when he sees the plan for what it really is.
And with this awesomely magical ticket, we can all finally live together. Forever.
Serious?
Always.
We can all live together? You and me and Mom, for real?
You know it.
Can Yuki come? And now and Hiro and everyone?
Maybe. I mean, probably, right?
Yay! That's so awesome! Oh, Mom, this is gonna be so awesome!
Yes, Nozomi. It's wonderful news, isn't it, Koda?
We all get to be together! Oh, this is amazing, Mom!
That's right, sweetheart.
I knew Koda would come through, I just knew it!
You can always count on your family. Best go get ready, sweetie.
I lied.
You made the decision you had to.
I lied to everyone. I couldn't tell them.
So, he and Brendan do end up changing their minds, but my point is they could have simply just made everyone dissent when they learned of the Ark project, but they didn't. I really like how they took the time to show some of the characters wrestling with the decision. Alright, let's talk about Shio, or Shio's death rather. She was cute, she was kind, she was innocent. She wasn't gonna last. I feel like her main purpose was there to provide you with a different perspective to the rampaging beast you were used to fighting because she is an origami. I guess I should say that her dying isn't really an accurate description of what happened. Her physical body got eaten, but she ended up going to the moon, and remnants of her do materialize and help the heroes during the resurrection arc, and actually it is heavily implied that they will find a way to bring her back. Anyway, none of that matters because I'm pretty sure someone was still cutting onions when they rolled the credits after the first arc. Now, let's talk about Soma for a bit. I didn't like him at first. I thought he was going to be one of those overly edgy characters, but he wasn't. Or rather, he kind of was, but I feel like it's justified considering what he's been through. Johannes, his wife Aisha, who was the head of the origami research a long time ago, and Dr. Sakaki were trying to implement a substance called the bias factor into humans, and it's basically what would later give the God Eaters their powers. They were conducting this experiment prior to Soma's birth. The experiment already worked on animals, and Aisha was pregnant with Johannes' child at the time, and they decided to use their child as the test subject for the experiment. This kid was Soma. The experiment was a success. Soma was born with the P73 bias factor, and everyone involved except Johannes and Sakaki died, the latter only having survived because he stopped taking part in the experiment prior to Aisha's delivery. Soma blamed himself for his mom's death, and when he officially became a God Eater, his teams had a very high casualty rate.
Oh, Eric, look out!
This caused him to distance himself from others, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't want anyone else to suffer just from him being around. He does grow a little bit as a character. He warms up to everyone as the game story goes on, especially Shio, so he kinda turned me off at first, but I guess you can say I kinda warmed up to him too, in a way. I want to talk about Lindo next, and how he's not actually dead. I suspected he was still alive because I felt like if he actually died, they would have made it a little more obvious. After Alyssa accidentally trapped him, he kills the Prithvi Mata he was fighting, and then a Deities Pita shows up, and then you don't get to see the fight. And I feel like if they had every intention of killing him off, they would have shown you more, wouldn't they? The fact that everything in that scene was implied told me that he somehow survived, and I was right. Shio saved Lindo sometime before the rest of the group meets her, but the fight with the Pita caused the little bracelet that he was wearing to come off, and it led to an origami mutation. I guess the oracle cells seeped into his bloodstream or something? I'm assuming. They don't really explain how it happens in detail, but it happened. He ends up turning into a corrosive Hannibal, and I get the Hannibal was kind of the flagship monster for the Burst arc, but it would have been cool if they'd have used something original for the fully turned Lindo and not another recolor, but regardless, the Burst arc was good, and despite mostly being filler up until the end, the game did that thing again, with the Invisible Man cutting onions in front of the screen. I wish they had given the silent protagonist a full-blown personality and voice lines. He or she only speaks during battles, and I understand that it would have been hard to do this with each and every voice available in the game, but I would have been fine with taking fewer voice options in exchange for the character actually regularly speaking during the game's story. I'm bringing this up because the character does speak towards the end of the second and third arcs.
Get away! Get away from here! Now! That is an order! I command you!
Take the Ark and kill Lindo! You must finish it! What the? Captain!
You can't run away. I won't let you run away from living. You hear me? That's an order, Lindo!
I wanted to comment on that scene in particular. I feel like it would have been really cool if they'd have just let you go full Roxas on the corrosive Hannibal for one battle, but oh well. It didn't make the scene any less epic, but still. The protagonist speaks again at the end of the Resurrection arc when giving orders to the team and then one last time to thank Shio.
We'll take this monster down! Lindo, Soma, on my mark, strike from the flanks! Sophia, Coda, Alyssa, carve out an opening! Got it! Come through! Shio, thank you. Farewell.
So, back to the story being predictable, because I kind of went off on a little tangent. I want to talk about Ren, because it's pretty clear the guy was not human. I saw that coming a mile away. He sounded so artificial it was not funny. My first thought was that he was some kind of android and maybe Fenrir was experimenting with robots or something, because he sure sounds like one.
I can't leave them. I will say I must.
But then I figured it was more likely that he was an origami in human form, and I was kinda right. He's Lindo's God Arc in human form, and he turns back into one when you fight Lindo inside of his own head. The game got a little weird at that point. He, or it, depending on how you look at it, does eventually die protecting both you and Lindo from the Hannibal. And as far as Ren's effectiveness as a teammate, I don't think he had a lot of HP. Whenever I took him on missions, he would usually be the first to get KO'd, and it seems like everyone would ignore him if that happened. But as annoying as he was, I did kinda tear up a bit when he died, not gonna lie, but it's all good. Lindo soon rejoins the group, and you can take him on missions again. And he gets the ability to make his own blade and blaster from his new origami hand. Now, I think the last thing I wanted to talk about regarding the second arc was the final battle against the Black Hannibal. because it really goes to show how much context can affect gameplay. You see the Hannibal rearing its ugly head one last time, but this time, it's different. Because you got Lindo with you. You've been looking for Lindo for the entire arc, and he's finally there, and he's gonna help you out. One final push, and we'd be home free with him in tow. I was pumped. And it was at this point that I realized that as annoying as the game could be at times, I liked it. The feeling of me just dodging almost everything it was throwing at me and dancing back into melee range, I felt invincible during that fight. Not really, because I died like twice, but that was very impressive at that point in the game because my team and I had been dropping like flies since difficulty 5. So I'd like to say my improvement started with that fight. Now I guess the only arc that I haven't really gone into detail about is Resurrection, the last one. So the Nova, which was the artificial origami that Johannes created at the end of the original arc, is back. Sort of. See, Soma took charge in watching over its remains, but they escaped and they formed this special origami that eats its own kind and then takes on the qualities of those it devours, getting stronger each time. So it's basically a better version of you and your squad. And because this thing is like a trail mix origami, everyone's god arcs don't work well on it. Actually, Laika gives a better explanation than me on this, so I'll let her take over for a second.
Where do I start? Hey, did anyone ever tell you how the outer wall works? The big old one that encircles the whole branch? The super basic explanation is that the plating is inlaid with bias factors, particularly ones that the origami don't want to eat. From what I discovered, the second Nova operates on the same principles, the super basic ones. It's got a ton of different bias factors inside because it devours other origami and absorbs them. You see? Yeah? Kinda? No? Okay, it's like this. Your god arcs will react to the Nova the same way origami react to the wall. It's an unappetizing combination, like squid and peanut butter. This, I imagine, is why Alyssa's god arc wouldn't function right. You see where I'm going with this? The Nova will keep devouring, keep taking in weirder bias factors. And that means our weapons will become less and less effective as the monster gets strong.
The Arius Nova, which is what the origami was called, pushed these guys to their limit. After they found out that their god arcs weren't doing anything to it, basically, they started hunting down rarer Dreadnought class origami, trying to collect their cores before the Arius Nova could find them and devour them first. And the Arius actually wises up to this and beats them to the last, strongest core. The group soon discovers that the Arius Nova does indeed have a weakness. It becomes vulnerable shortly after devouring a core. So in other words, my interpretation of this was that while its appearance may change after eating a core, it needs time to digest it before it receives the core's full power. So during this time, the Arius defense is significantly lowered, and the stronger the core is, the more vulnerable it will be during its digestion phase. So think of when you, eat at an all-you-can-eat buffet, I guess. You're gonna be, really bloated and really sluggish until your food digests. It's kind of the same principle. So what was the plan? Well, the God Eaters were gonna use all the other Dreadnought cores that they collected to make one giant super bullet that Sakuya was gonna fire at the Nova. This would give everyone a window of opportunity to take out the Nova because, with a core that strong, its defense would have gone way down and given us a fighting chance. The only issue was, this is the only chance that they had of pulling this off, because if they couldn't finish the job, the Nova would become too strong to be stopped. And I just found it really cool having an antagonist that they couldn't beat just by hacking or shooting away at it. I like how at the end it was research, problem solving, and an intervention from Shio that saved the day. So that was pretty cool, and I feel like it was a pretty fitting finale to the game. Now, difficulty 14 actually happens after the Resurrection arc, but I heard it was mostly just extra missions. I didn't bother doing it. After I saw the credits roll for the third time, I was like, this has to be the end of the story. So, if something important did happen in difficulty 14 and I missed it, forgive me. Alright, I want to use the rest of the video to just talk about little details, stuff that I felt like they're worth mentioning, but they don't really belong under, outright good or outright bad. Now, I did see a lot of complaint about the dubbed voices. I can't really comment much on this since I never played any of the older versions of the game, so I have no idea what they sounded like before. I personally thought everyone sounded fine. Well, everyone except this guy. but something tells me if I went and listened to their original voices after being so used to their redubbed ones, it would sound weird to me. Let's talk about canon for a second. So she's a gag character and I had no idea. I would get so annoyed when I would take her along for missions and she would end up shooting me more than the origami that was several times my size. And I'd be like, what are you doing? It's almost as if you're doing this on purpose. Well, apparently I wasn't too far from the truth, because if you look her up in the database, she has a very high friendly fire rate. I still took her along pretty often though, since her penchant for shooting humans instead of origami did make her a pretty good healer. As for the difficulties, you can breeze through difficulty 1 and most of 2 with pretty much any loadout you want. From 3 onward, I was required to do some more planning. You know, it was then that I had to focus on elemental weaknesses and body parts. So for example, slashing damage, like I said earlier, really effective against tails. Crushing damage is good against a Vajra's head. Piercing is good against oh my goodness, I butchered this thing's name. The Gaboro's front side, and so on. Basically, you end up fighting the same types of origami a lot, and even though it does make the game feel tedious, like I said before, it does help you memorize their body parts and what weapons do the most damage against what parts. I did mention that the game started giving me trouble after a while. There was a difficulty spike, and I felt it. Ooh, I felt it. The game was pretty easy up until difficulty 4. 4 was manageable. It was noticeably harder, but manageable. Then I get to difficulty 5, and all of a sudden origami were moving at 50 million miles per hour. A lot of them could jump from one end of the room to the next in an instant, meaning that I had to use most of my stamina just to keep up with them, and these things would just twitch and one-shot me. And yes, I'm looking right at you, Mr. Bitch Hannibal. This did force me to actually learn how to block and dodge properly. The infamous HDH bullets help too. I'll leave a link to where I found the recipe below because I did not come up with that thing myself. Trust me on that one. I also want to mention that I initially thought that the number on the shield was an indicator of how much damage I was going to absorb. I was wrong. I learned very, very, very late into the game that the number actually contributes to your character's defense. It was around difficulty 11 that I realized this, and I think by then the newest shields were like rank 11, rank 10, and mine was still rank 6. So don't make the same mistake I did. Upgrade your shield or craft new ones often. I'll always remember the first mission against the Prithvi Mata and Deities Pita. The mission opens with a Mata in the vicinity and the Pita approaching in 2 minutes. That gives you 2 minutes to prepare, and this is the mission that forced me to strategize. This is the mission that got me comfortable with splitting up my team when the going got tough, because there was no way you could take these guys on at one time. The command ability was not perfect, but it was still very useful. It made missions feel possible, and I feel like most importantly, it made me feel like a leader. So I guess in the end of the day, it got the job done. Like I said, not perfect, but it really does drive home the team is under your command. You need to arrange them in a way that makes the mission most effective and doesn't kill you in 2 shots. So overall, this game, it wasn't only my first God Eater, but my first introduction into these monster hunting type games to begin with, because I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I've never played any of the Monster Hunter games either. Like I said before, the game did have its flaws, most notably the spread out story and awkward command system, and how I felt the game went from a fun little hack and slash to, you know, super brutal real quick. But despite all of this, I did really enjoy the game, especially as I started making a habit of watching the enemy and reacting accordingly. Basically, there was a learning curve, and I gradually got used to it. And between the science fantasy setting and the newfound attachment to the characters, I'll definitely be giving the sequel a try. It's actually in my library as I'm speaking. So, to conclude, if you stuck around for this long, thank you. I really appreciate it. It took me a while to beat the game, and then putting this video together was a lot more time consuming than I thought it would be. But I did have a lot of fun, and I'll definitely be doing more of these for games that I play off screen. But anyway, for now, that'll be it for this video, and hopefully the first of many, so stay safe and good eating.
Data lines established. We're reading green all across the board. Ready when you are.
All God Eaters, forward! Operation begin! Wait, is that what we say?